Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Happy days are here again, and understanding a question is half an answer, and this is, of course, Half the Answer with your host, Trent R. Nelson, and, of course, Caitlin M. Green. Well, I'm a historian and a philosopher and a writer, and a lot of things, wear a lot of hats. But so does Caitlin. Caitlin, she wears more hats because she's a writer, she's an editor, she's a linguist, she's a genius, she's a mom. She's braided up. Well, Caitlin, it has been so marvelous. Our discussions as of late, they've been just as brilliant as our original ones, but well, the tides keep turning, and we've got to have more education. Well, who have you brought for us today?
Trent, first let me say it's so much nicer when you do the intro. I think you really believe it, and the listeners can tell, and that's nice. Also, I have to apologize for my voice. I am so sick, but I am getting better, I swear. I think once your voice goes, that's when you know, you've turned the corner on it.
Caitlin sounds great, and you can just put in the comments how great she sounds. How about that?
Yeah, so gravelly, so serious, so austere. That's me. Or just vocal fry. That's basically all it is. So Trent, I brought you a real gift today. I brought you Lindsey Cormack. She's an assistant professor of political science, director of the diplomacy lab at Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. She publishes this amazing, it's a blog, I guess. It's so cool. It's called DCInbox Insights, which tracks how members of Congress communicate with constituents. And as a linguist, I love it so much. It's corpus analysis, it's data analysis, it's everything I want and more. She also wrote this book called How to Raise a Citizen and Why It's Up to You to Do It, which highlights the importance of giving our kids the tools they need to be full participants in civic life. Lindsey, I was introed as a mom. It's true. The rumors are true. I have 2 kids. I'm so deeply invested in this. So thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us, Lindsey. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm good. It's the first day of school where I am, so I sent my 8th grader off just a few hours ago.
This is where I was last week, and I was simply buzzing with energy, and I think I annoyed our last guest with just how much energy I had. And then what happens after your kids start going to school? They bring home germs. So now here I am.
Something to look forward to.
I'm the ghost of school year future for you.
Congratulations on 8th grade, by the way. That's fantastic.
Yeah, big deal. Big kids learning cool stuff like algebra and variables and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with a screed, so just be prepared. But you can cut in any time if you have thoughts, feelings, whatever. The first target of my screed is, of course, Trent. Trent, you have been forcing me to learn about history. You have been making me talk about international relations, countries that I don't live in, okay? And I've had enough of it. My brain hurts. I'm sick. So we're back on my home turf, which is communication.
Hey!
So today we're going to talk to Lindsey about her corpus analysis of current political communications. But I want to start with a story about the debate over gun regulations in the 2000s. So every couple of decades, the terrain on gun policy changes drastically in this country. I feel like people are constantly moving around, thinking what policies they're comfortable with, what policies they want to advocate, what they can sell to the people, what the people are thinking about. So in the 1930s, people were afraid of gangsters with Tommy guns holding up banks and robbing people. So certain kinds of weapons that were termed gangster weapons got these huge restrictions applied to them. And then in the 60s, we were thinking about assassinations. No reason. We were just thinking about it, right? And we were thinking about street crime. And so the Gun Control Act of 1968 meant that gun sellers had to comply with a whole lot of regulations. Age restrictions showed up. Certain items were prohibited from sale. There's a lot of loopholes in there. There's kinds of weapons that you can't sell, like military surplus weapons, but you can sell all the parts. So, still kind of weird. And then the NRA was working at this point overtime to weaken the Gun Control Act because they found it very repressive, right? So the thing is, in the 80s, the mainstream Democrat politicians' position was to support the NRA. A lot of them were getting really good. The NRA scores you based on how well you vote with them. The NRA was giving them a lot of really good grades. Good job, Democrats. Thanks. And this includes people like Al Gore, like people you don't really think of today as being like really good for the NRA. And in 1986, Reagan signed the Firearms Owners Protection Act. And if you read through it, every line of it feels designed to make it easier to get weapons where they don't belong. It's like you can't track these things, you can't restrict these things, like just a whole lot of sort of undoing a lot of the parts of the Gun Control Act that people had voted in the 60s. So in the 1990s, we started getting these mass shootings, right? And it started to feel like, are we experiencing a terrifying trend? Could we call it an epidemic, right? And today, I think a lot of people would argue that it's an epidemic. And in fact, people want to include it under public health because it's a public health concern, right? So by 2000, it was super, super evident that something was up. And so, welcome to the stage, Americans for Gun Safety. This is a lobby. This is like a political think tank organization. And while the right was busy bolstering support for the Second Amendment as a limit-free promise to all Americans that they could have as many of whatever kind of gun they wanted, complete with a fear-mongering campaign that the Democrats were going to confiscate everyone's weapons and they were going to like take your guns and melt them down and turn them into like playground slides. I remember that being a thing. That only the law-abiding would comply, and then our country would be overrun with criminals, gangsters, murderers, armed to the teeth with their ill-gotten guns, right? And an argument like that could have been found in basically any Democrat's platform before 2000. But then in 2000, Columbine had everyone really shaken. People wanted decisive action. We had grieving parents on TV, in congressional hearings, looking for justice. And one of the things that they were looking for was restrictions and regulations on guns. On the right, the phrase gun control became a dirty word. It became synonymous with repression and with having your property stolen, right? And they had this idea of like law-abiding gun owners are going to be punished for the actions of these criminals, right? And Americans for Gun Safety was there to agree with them. They said, it's not gun control that we want. That's actually a bad idea. We're not going to take guns away from responsible owners. We're just looking to increase safety. And they had one policy win, right? They advocated for this gun show background check loophole to be closed, and it happened. We did it. However, the only reason it really happened is that Al Gore broke the tie on the vote. So he made it happen, really. And he was not using their script in 2000 at all. In fact, he was out there saying the NRA is a special interest group that is buying influence and it's making you less safe, and I'm not for it. And he's the guy who won the primary, if we recall, in 2000. And he's also the guy who won the popular vote of the general election. President Gore. Oops. So you know who was following their advice, though? Howard Dean. So that's a political success story if I've ever heard one. Other than that, Americans for Gun Safety didn't really get a lot of policies passed. It turns out that when you have a serious gun problem in a country, all the ways to fix the problem are going to involve making some pro-gun people upset, which essentially at their core was not acceptable. So then in 2004, after Bush Jr. won his second term, Americans for Gun Safety was folded into a larger lobbying/think tank group. And that group's name is The Third Way. So we here on Half the Answer are no strangers to griping about the Third Way. Lindsey, our guest, establishes in her analysis that this is not a group that you've had like on your radar that you've been mad at before. So you're here for cred. That's like, it's not that we're being biased and we're just picking on them all the time. It's that we have a question and we can use their memo to help us answer it. But we do gripe about them a lot, sorry. And here's some more gripes. And you can see they continued their mission of not making the far right mad. Don't make them think about LGBTQ plus people. Don't push back on their fears about immigrants or the poor. Don't make people worry about the wealthy having to pay some more taxes so that we can have things like healthcare, housing, whatever. And fast forward to today, and this newest memo that we got published on their website about the words that Democratic politicians have got to stop saying if they want to stop turning off normal people. So this memo is called, like, was it something we said, I think. And its introductory section says, in reality, most Democrats do not run or govern on wildly out of touch social positions. But voters would be excused to believe we do because of the words that come out of our mouths, words which sound like we are hiding behind unfamiliar phrases to mask extreme intent. And this memo includes words like dead naming, heteronormative, postmodernism, which are words that I have never heard out of my representatives' mouths. And Trent, as you know, I live in Oregon, where like maybe you might even expect it, but it's not happening here. And so this all seemed kind of weird to me and to a lot of people who read it. And so we invited Lindsey Cormack, who did an analysis of political communications with this list in mind, to try to figure it out. So Lindsey, I'm so excited to talk about your findings. My first question is, what are the kinds of artifacts that are in your data set? Is it like stuff from TV or just written, or like what's the situation there?
So the database that I work with is called DCInbox, and I started in 2009, and it updates in real time, so it goes through today. And what it is every member in the House and Senate gets a member's representational allowance for them to communicate to their constituents in their official capacity to tell them like what they're doing on their behalf. It might be introducing legislation or taking positions or saying they want to hold a hearing or whatever it is, but it's not stuff like vote for me or give me money. It's not campaign. It's not personal. It's from their .gov email. So it's much more standard looking than any of those like flashier things that you see asking you for money.
I see. So it's like, here's what we're doing for you. Here's the events that are happening, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, theoretically. I mean, the parties approach it really differently. Democrats tend to do much more of the like, there's a veterans roundtable, or I'm having like a job forum. Republicans tend to use it more for ideological positioning, or they tend to take on these topics more often than Democrats do. But theoretically, it's meant to be like letting constituents know what you're doing on their behalf.
Okay. So this helps explain one of the findings that I saw recently on your Blue Sky, which was about like, it's also in the DC Inbox Insights Substack. So about who talks about the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the Democrats are like, I'm not going to tell you necessarily about the president right now because I'm talking about my job, like in a smaller, right? Whereas like the Republicans are more likely to refer to who's the president right now, either because it's like Obama and they want you to be freaked out, or I guess, I don't know, the Trump line is interesting to me. What do you think about
Yeah,
the
so when I first started doing this back in 2009, 2010, it was Republicans talking about Obama a lot. This was also when the
yeah.
healthcare debate was happening. And then
Mhm.
Obama sort of persisted as the focus. And I was thinking like maybe this is just because he's the president. If there's a different president, there might not be that much focus. And then when we had Trump come into office, I thought maybe Democrats would take over and start saying like, I dislike what Trump is doing. But
Mhm.
instead, what I found is Democrats did step up their like Trump disparagement, but Republicans in turn stepped up their like Trump support. And so you didn't see this reversal. You really saw that like Republicans were willing to say like this is our guy. And then we came back to Biden, Democrats again sort of like lower focus, Republicans focused on Biden a lot more. And we're just now seeing these first parts of the Trump administration, and Democrats are stepping up their attacks, but Republicans are also stepping up their endorsements. And so it's something where Republicans, at least over the last 15 years, have tended to be okay with focusing things on that one unitary executive, whereas Democrats tend to do other stuff in their communications.
Yeah, that feels fairly reflective of their thinking about who the president is and what their powers should be, I guess.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a really, really useful piece of information. And then I guess let's go into the memo, right? Like that the reason why something like Third Way exists is essentially to like advise politicians on how they should proceed, right? And so their stated goal is, we're gonna help remove Trump and like undo this like walk we're doing into personalism or fascism or whatever, by coming up with the strategies that are going to work best for Democrats, right? And their general goal has looked to be to say we're not going to achieve that by leaning into the sort of like left progressive, quote unquote, woke way of doing things and way of communicating to people, we're only going to do that if we actually like actively reject that, because that is the language of weirdos, right? And so the memo itself has this list. Was it 50 words they put?
Yeah, 50.
And they put it into categories. And so I thought we would just like kind of go category by category. So the first one is called therapy speak. And they introduce it by saying, these words say, I'm more empathetic than you, and you are callous to hurting others' feelings. And so to me, that feels like they're reading a lot into how Democratic politicians are speaking to their constituents or to the general public, right? Like, that's a lot of guesswork as to like where that stuff is coming from. So like when you're talking about, hang on, what are those words?
Well, again, it's one of those situations where we project how we feel, right?
Yeah,
Like they feel as though they are being spoken to, or that this language makes them feel as though they're being called callous or being called
yeah,
insensitive, and they take offense to it because who wants to be told that?
right. So I think that, yeah, if you use words that suggest that you're conveying something like empathy, right, which is what this category looks designed to describe, it is a choice to take that as an attack. and Third Way has definitely made that choice here. And so the words in the therapy speak category are privilege, violence, but then they say as in environmental violence. So I have questions about that in a second. Dialoguing, othering, triggering, microaggression / assault / invalidation. Like those are all one item. Progressive stack, centering, safe space, holding space, and body shaming. And the first one that I thought about was holding space, because to me that's weird. Just because that was an internet meme at the time of the elections, and so if I were trying to get attention or do something fun, I would use the phrase holding space just because of what happened. I don't know if you remember, but during the when the first Wicked movie came out and Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo were doing the press stuff, there was just like a weird interview where an interviewer told them that that people were holding space with or for the lyrics of Defying Gravity. And then they reacted in a very funny way because they just went like, oh, I didn't know that was happening. And like nobody in the room knows what they meant by that. It was just like very silly. And it became a funny meme that everybody was just like, I don't know what holding space means, but I'm doing it. And so like, it's just a weird one to have in there because it did become an internet meme for a while. But let's talk about those words. Like, did any of them show up in your data set?
So most of them don't show up that much because that's not really how these people are talking. But for instance, like holding space, the only
Yeah.
time that ever showed up was when AOC, she sent a message that said, in June we're holding space for Gun Violence Awareness Month. That's one that she said. And
That
then there
doesn't
was
sound like a
another
joke.
one. There was another one from Congressman Rick Allen, who's a Republican in Georgia. And when you just, query the database for holding space, you might think it means like holding space in the way AOC used it. But he was talking about like running out of holding spaces in immigrant detention centers.
Oh,
Like he
gross.
says, we're like running out of holding space. And so it was like,
Mm.
oh, okay, that's a little bit different. That's certainly not
How
what they're
come that
talking
didn't
about.
make the third way list?
Holding
Well, I
space
guess
in
it did,
detention
but
centers.
yeah. Yeah, I would say if you don't want to alienate your voters, you probably shouldn't talk about locking them up all the time. But, that's just me. Okay, so yeah, holding space rarely happened and it unfortunately wasn't used in the meme sense. That's so sad for me.
Yeah, none of
Um,
that. Violence is an
yeah.
interesting one. So violence is actually
Yeah.
about 50-50, where both Democrats and Republicans do talk about violence in different ways. There is a particular type of violence that Democrats will say more than others, which is gun violence. That's a term that they will use. Republicans don't really use gun violence, but like
Yeah.
environmental violence, I've never heard that said, and it also never appeared in any of these. Some of the
Yeah.
other stuff like dialoguing was said by one Republican, othering was said by one Republican. Triggering is a hard one because in congressional sort of speak, sometimes stuff
Yes.
will trigger other things. It'll be like, if we don't do this, PAYGO triggers sequestration in whatever. And so if we're talking about triggering as in like you're going to say something that might make someone feel sensitive because they have a history that like triggers a memory in their brain, that's not really something that Democrats or Republicans talk about. But for some of these things like microaggression, that's something where Republicans, there was only one instance of microaggression in the last 15 years that was used, and that was when former Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida was talking about how some Coast Guard manuals talked about microaggressions, and he wanted to get rid of that because it was an indication of the like woke agenda to indoctrinate our service members. He's the only one who mentioned that.
Our poor impressionable service members. Yeah. So I think that becomes kind of a pattern in your findings as well, that some of those extremely sort of woke sounding words like microaggressions are not being used so much by Democratic representatives and politicians, but by Republicans to attack the other side, right? To say,
Or
like,
to like
you're doing
caricature. I mean, even the term
yeah,
woke, Democrats never went around in Congress
Right.
saying like, let's get woke, everyone, or like they
Yeah.
never did that. But as soon as that term had some sort of like nugget of meaning, Republicans took it to say like, there's this woke indoctrination or this woke
yeah,
radical, whatever. And I'm making this sign with my hand because there is like a peak, like we are over peak woke, at least in congressional communications that
yeah.
happened a few years ago, but it was nearly exclusively Republicans talking
Right.
about it to make a caricature of what they thought the left was
Right.
doing.
So what is the shape of the woke line? Do you have
It's
it?
like up and then down. I mean, I'll send it over to you later. But yeah,
Where does the
and it's
drop
all
happen?
Republicans.
Is it before the 2024 election? Is it like
You know what? It's
during?
something I can do in real time. So let me just run it and I'll figure it. It's
So maybe
the
today.
the highest point was from April 2023 to November 2023, and then it sort of drops, but it sort of like comes up and then it peters out, and we're still on the downward trajectory today.
Interesting.
Woke was in critical mass around that point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
woke
truly
was the
was,
highest.
and like us getting yelled at for being woke was also like peaking
Well,
there. So that makes sense.
well, Lindsay, I have what probably is a ridiculous question. Um, why are people saying, why is the third way? Why are other people that I read on the blue sky, why are they saying that we say all these things and that all these things get said if by your evidence we don't say all these things?
So I think it's important. I don't know. I wasn't familiar with Third Way prior to this, and I'm really outside of the campaign sphere. Most of my
Yeah,
stuff is like once someone's been elected. So I
Sure.
suppose it is possible that there are candidates that are on the left that campaign using this rhetoric. And I do know that there is evidence that like Democrats do some of these things when we look at the party platforms. So like for instance, the party platforms from the Democratic and the Republican Party have come out, for the last 30 years. You can download them all. And for the last two times, Democrats have started their party platform with a land acknowledgement. And I think that sort of feels similar to this stuff. Not so much maybe the therapy speak, but that seminar room language. And so I do
yeah,
sort of understand that there are residuals of some of this in some of the sort of like political performances that Democrats will put on. But by and large, I think the characterization that Democrats are doing this sort of stuff is not true. It wasn't true with woke or with DEI or with CRT or the Green New Deal. Like there's so many terms that the right captures and then redeploys to say like the left is doing this,
Right.
even if there's scant evidence that the left is doing it, or if it's happening in very small, maybe like localized defund police things happening in parts of the country, but it's certainly not the national Democratic stance or the way that they're talking about these things.
their strategy, right? Yeah. So the next category is called seminar room language, which again they open it by creating this sort of notion in the reader's head that there's something nefarious happening. So it says, this language says, I'm smarter and more concerned about important issues than you. Your kitchen table concerns are small. So it creates a dichotomy, right, between kitchen table issues, which are the things that real Americans care about, which are like the price of milk or like your taxes, um, like job rates, that kind of thing. And then saying that like these things that you're looking at here are not kitchen table issues. No real person actually cares about them. Like normal people don't care about them, right? Only you seminar people, you like chattering classes, the people who are paid to go into your workplace and lecture you about diversity, that kind of thing. So those words are subverting norms, systems of oppression, critical theory, cultural appropriation, postmodernism, Overton window, heuristic, and existential threat. And they say, like, especially if you're talking about the climate, the planet, democracy, or the economy, which is funny because I thought the economy was kitchen table issues, but what do I know? So yeah, this one is really interesting because, as a person who did social science / humanities grad school, like, I recognize some of these terms, of course. Especially like I did a feminist theory specialization, so like it's all in there in here. But I don't think I've heard like AOC necessarily. Maybe she said systems of oppression. I'm not sure.
No, so
But
6 people have said systems of oppression. She's not one
yeah.
of them, but like Ilhan Omar is, Rashida Tlaib is, Adriano Espaillat is, Paul Tonko has, and most of those other terms never happen. Like no one ever says subverting norms.
Yeah.
No one ever says postmodernism. No one ever says Overton window. Heuristic is sort of a funny one. Like heuristic, there's one from former Congressman Paul Ryan, which like that made sense to me. I was like, that does seem like a word that
It's
Paul
the
Ryan would
Ryan-y thing
use.
to do.
Yeah, I was like that. Yeah, that fits. But then the other three are from Representative Terry Sewell when it's talking about like NSF grants for things that are looking for heuristic models of stuff. So that's not really even her using that as a term. It's just like in the thing.
It's like taking
But
from the NSF language, right?
yeah, but there are these other two things that do happen, but from Republicans again. So like critical theory, that's used in 5E newsletters. All of them are from Republicans, but critical race theory is one that's used way more than Republicans. And that sort of peaked in 2001. And that's something where Democrats never came out and said like, we need to be teaching critical race theory in our kindergartens. But Republicans were saying we need to get critical race theory out of our kindergartens, despite the fact that there's not like good evidence that was happening, or that Democrats were pushing for it. And then cultural appropriation, again, is one of those where just Matt Gaetz was saying that because, again, I think it was the Coast Guard. It might have been the Air Force. I think it was the Air Force where in their manual, they said, like, don't use the term spirit animal because that might be an example of cultural appropriation or erasure of indigenous or native cultures. But that's the only instance in the last 15 years.
And also they're right about that. Like, sorry, it's trivializing a religion. So it's maybe not the best thing to tell people that like, you're my spirit animal or whatever. Like that's, yeah, I'm always, I am the woke scold in the liberal currents community. So it's okay if you don't like that I said that. But yeah, again, like it's just not something that politicians are super duper focused on, especially these things like microaggression, which was in an earlier one, or cultural appropriation. Those are like very interpersonal actions, right? And so unless they were like microaggressed against publicly, they might say something about it, but like it's really unlikely, and I know a lot of these Congress people who are not white and who are not men probably do experience that all the time, right? But they're not writing out like these missives to their constituents about it. No. Yeah. So again, like the way that the memo also reads into this is really interesting because they love to use the word we, like, we got to stop doing this. Okay. We're alienating people. And it's interesting positioning to me because it's like, we're all on the same team. Okay. Don't yell at me. And I'm speaking as like one of you. So like, I totally understand the desire to use these kinds of language, but don't do it anymore. Right. And then of course, using it as a foregone conclusion, like when we use these words, and it's like, okay, but we don't, do we? So they say studies show that the part of the brain that signals distrust becomes more active when we use words people don't understand, that's very interesting. And like, I don't know, sure, maybe they didn't put a link.
That's believable to me. I had an advisor who would like occasionally pepper in like French terms when he'd talk to me, and I'd be like, I don't really know what we're talking about now.
Yeah,
I don't know if distrust is it, but I was like, I can't do this with you because I didn't ever learn that.
Yeah,
right.
They clearly didn't have the je ne sais quoi that's required to be a really good teacher.
Well, like again, maybe I'm poking holes, but there does seem to be a marked difference between speaking a different language to somebody and just using different English words.
Sure.
Certainly.
Yeah, right. Like using a $15 word from your own language as opposed to just completely switching into another one. It's a little rough. Especially like a high prestige one like French. That's not nice.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good one. And yeah, I just think that like it's creating this division, right? This whole thing about like I'm going to help you reach other people. I'm going to help you like reach more people. Um in doing so it really constructs this division between like um us versus them that I think is really counterproductive personally to be like, oh yeah, well, those normal people, like we know what a
Mm.
heuristic is. Like we know what the Overton window represents, but like those dummies don't know and they're going to hate us if we talk like this. Right? I think it's like actually more divisive that way.
Well, and
um
it just isn't happening. Like, it's just not, at
right
least
again
in Congress, it's not what they're doing.
Yeah. Like I'm sure there's a lot of ways that we could improve democratic messaging, but this just doesn't feel like it. Okay, next category, organizer jargon. I love this one. Oh wait, no, I want to go back really quick because the existential threat thing is really interesting to me. So did you see that being said a lot?
Yes, not a lot. So in the
This
whole database, there's 209,000, and that has been said by Republicans 177 times, Democrats 172, and it's pretty split. And Democrats were saying this more in 2009 to 2003, and then Republicans were saying it after that. Prior to that, it wasn't really said that much, but existential threat sort of like started in 2019.
So do you have information on like what kinds of things are an existential threat in these communications?
I mean, yeah, it's like it's knowable.
Yeah.
And I imagine Democrats and Republicans have different things that they
Right.
think about as this. I'm like looking it up right now. The last time it was
Yeah.
said, um, last time it was said was by Rick Scott. I think this is. Yeah, this is Rick Scott,
Cool.
who's a Republican in Florida. And he said, Senator Rick Scott said, "We cannot forget the existential threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to our national security and American citizens." And then goes on to talk about how the CCP does things. So that makes sense to me, and that sort of squares away. Republicans talk a lot more about China than Democrats do.
I was gonna say I saw your graph on China and it was like out of control how different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and foreign policy generally, they do a lot more of that than I mean, they're doing the same amounts of foreign policy, but they talk about it a lot more.
Yeah. So they
Whereas Democrats
Democrats
might
and
have other things.
Republicans were talking about China about the same amount until 2018, right? And then it just split and Republicans went way up.
Yeah, and I think it ended up being like almost a quarter of all the messages they sent in 1 year were
Oh
talking
yeah,
about
I can see
China.
on the y-axis it's really
Yeah.
approaching 0.25 there.
Yeah, it was a
Wow.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
And
I
then
just looked
for
up,
the Democrats it's like 5%. Less
yeah,
than 5,
it's never
4
a big
maybe.
focus.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last time a Democrat said existential threat was Thursday, August 7th.
Okay.
Congresswoman Kelly Morrison, who's out of Minnesota, and she wrote that, "Unfortunately, over the past several months, I've heard from countless small business owners about how the Trump administration's tariff policies are posing an existential threat to their business."
That feels very kitchen table-y if I'm honest.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. That's like very down home.
Seems quite grounded and true. Like I've seen a lot of people saying like, well, I can't get my materials anymore or like, I can't produce my product anymore. So very
Right.
fair.
Our problem was calling it an existential threat. Clearly,
Apparently, yeah.
that language is unacceptable, even if what we're
It's
talking
too
about is literally that.
and I think it's pretty rude, honestly, to the average person to say that the phrase existential threat is a word that they don't understand. Like it's got existence right there in it. I think you guys are good. I think you can read
Threat?
existential threat and understand what's being said. I don't know. We know what a threat is, at least. Like, even if the adjective part didn't clock, like, you know what a threat is. So, you can use your context clues. I believe in us as Americans. um, okay, next category, organizer jargon. So, again, they have this little intro. These words say, we are beholden to groups, not individuals. People have no agency. So, this is peak third way jargon right here. So this idea of the groups, they love to fearmonger about the groups and how the Democratic Party is being held hostage by the groups. And what they mean is like identity people, like
Mm.
people who have identities. So it's like the trans rights lobby, which is people who are trans, and like oh, who else is the people who want housing, that kind of thing. These are like the groups, the leftists, the progressives, the woke. Those are the groups. And they really, really, really want the Democratic Party to shake free of those groups and start to be much more like moderate and much more buttoned up and much more centristy. So here we are. And again, we have this like individualism, right? American individualism, which like that has a deep history. So here we have like organizer jargon, which is immediately designed to make us think about activists. And these are the kind of things that organizers say. So they are radical transparency, small d democracy. I really like that one. Barriers to participation, stakeholders, the unhoused, food insecurity, housing insecurity, and person who immigrated. So like right away I can see a little pattern there, which is they don't like that person first language type of thing, right? Which was sort of a trend. I don't know if I could put a date on it, but like somewhere in the 2010s maybe, that some people started saying like, oh, it feels really weird for me to say like disabled person. So maybe I should say like person experiencing a disability, or like homeless person. It feels like I'm defining them as their circumstance, right? And so like, what if we all just agreed that we start saying person with or person experiencing, right? And that became kind of like a trend in the groups of people who were talking about those kinds of issues. And then people started to feel like, okay, we're making things a little clunky for ourselves. We're not always able to be specific when we use language like that. Like sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, whatever. But like clearly the people who wrote this memo didn't like the existence of that kind of trend. And I think you can see that there. So how does this list represent in your data set?
It's kind of split. So radical transparency is not really said at all, but transparency is one that Republicans actually say it far more than Democrats. Transparency in the last 15 years has been said 12,000 times by Republicans and only 4,000 times by Democrats. I don't know. The radical transparency had only been said 6 times total for Republicans to Democrats. They never say small d democracy. And my sense is when we talk about that as organizers speak, that might be like we're doing things on an individual level basis. And so Congress isn't really going to talk like that. Barriers to participation is something that is not said often. It's been said 6 times. 5 of those are from Democrats. And often it's talking about barriers to participation that might be encountered if you change voter registration or the sorts of documentation that you're going to need to actually vote on election day. And so that'll say like, this is going to throw up another barrier to participation. Yeah. Or there's one of them was talking about like a barrier to participation in cancer trials if we adopt some new thing that the GAO is going to do. When you get to stakeholders, that one was like a funny one, I guess, for me to have included on the list. Stakeholders is 2-1 Republicans to Democrats. And my sort of sense there is that comes out of the business context. And so it's like not surprising that it exists in our communications, and not surprising to me, at least, that there's more Republicans that are willing to do it. But when you get to those next ones, unhoused, food insecurity, housing insecurity, those are terms that are said more by Democrats than Republicans. They are not said that frequently at all. And things like unhoused, that starts in 2021, which might have been when you were saying like this is sort of the language that we're doing. I also think there was like a push in medical fields to, instead of saying like an obese person, you might say a person with obesity or something. So I think there's probably overlap. Food insecurity again starts in 2020, 2021. Housing insecurity is also late 2020, early 2021. But on each of these, it's not really widely used. Food insecurity is probably used the most.
I mean, for both of those topics, food insecurity and housing insecurity, from what I understand, they did come mostly from people in those fields trying to better articulate the sort of nuance of not having a house or being
I was going to say,
the realm
these
of,
seem like
same with food
like bids
insecurity.
for like specificity over anything else, right? To say like, if I'm doing like specific policy interventions, I don't necessarily want to talk about the homeless because people might not might not understand exactly what the conditions are of that person, right? And like a person living in a tent or living in a car or living in a hotel room, like, are they homeless? Are they houseless? Are they housing insecure? Like, what is their exact circumstance, right? And so,
Right.
like, you want to be specific about it because you're trying to intervene in a
Well,
specific way, right?
they
Um,
they
yeah,
also help to create a bigger pool of people that we are talking about that are potentially dealing with something, right? So, like, to be
yeah,
homeless is maybe the same as being housing insecure, but also is not always the same as being housing
yeah.
insecure.
Because you
So
could be in an apartment right now, but like, one bad turn of luck, right, gets you out of it. So it is something that, like, yeah, again, if I'm looking to create a policy that keeps more people under a roof, then I need a term, not for any like important like high moral reason, but literally just so that I can like title my document, right? Like, who am I talking about here? I am
uh,
talking about people who either don't live in an apartment or a house right now, or they do, but they're like about to lose it, right?
No.
um,
Well, that's just it. Is that if you speak to people in this field, they'll say that we're trying to prevent homelessness. We're actually targeting the housing insecure because
yeah.
if we let them become homeless, then that's more work that we have to do to help them get into a better position. We don't want. That's what do they call it? Functional zero. That's what
Yeah.
functional zero aims to do, is to make sure that, like, if you become in a state where you're going to lose your home, like, there are resources within a month time that can help to provide that for you, right? And so I guess it feels as though there is like this all has the air of like the policing of language, right? Which is like incredibly ironic because that's all I hear
No, don't
from
say
the
that though, Trent,
conservatives.
because the document says we're not the language police. We're just listing a bunch of words that you should stop using. That's different.
But I mean, it is also possible that the interpretation could be stop talking about homelessness altogether. Because if we think about just the word homeless, Republicans use it less than Democrats because they don't focus on it as much.
We don't want you to
But
think about it as a problem,
maybe
right?
that's what it is. And like, it doesn't matter if you say housing insecure or unhoused. It's like any of these reminders, this isn't a
Yeah.
constituency that's going to turn out and vote. So maybe just stop talking about it. I don't know, because
Right.
homeless is a word that is used more. But when we think about like sort of what the synonyms might be, I just looked up poor and needy. Those are words that Republicans use more than Democrats, but
Mm.
homeless is still the ones that's used the most.
So what are they saying when they talk about the poor and the needy? Are
I think
they
they're
saying
probably
like
talking about TANF, but I'm not sure. Like I'm not totally sure because I haven't looked into this before, but they do say it
Right.
more.
needy is so interesting too? I'm glad you thought of it because I wouldn't have. um, yeah, so it's about this like euphemistic talk, right? That's what they really don't want you to do, is like, don't give me euphemisms about these things. And really what's so interesting is the way they're focused on we are beholden to groups, not individuals, because it truly is like um it's this idea that we have gotten a lot, which is if you talk about the circumstances that different people are in, then you're being divisive, right? So, like, talking about
Mhm.
racism is divisive, talking about class problems is divisive, right? Talking about poverty, talking about gender, talking about like marriage equality or like, rights for queer people, that's all very divisive because it only like applies to certain people. And it seems like that's what they really don't like, is that if it applies to a group of people but not another group of people, then I don't want you to talk about it because it's like alienating, right?
Yeah, that sounds like that could be a read there. Yeah.
So yeah, they finish up by saying Democrats can fight for the poor, the hungry, the homeless, and immigrants more effectively if they speak in everyday language and in the language of those most affected by these issues. So like, yeah, it feels like when they started the list, they were like, hey, I don't like you talking about groups. And then at the end, they're like, also, I don't like euphemisms. So those are kind of two different issues. The euphemistic speak, I can see like advising people to get away from. Um, and that's fine. That's probably good advice. But yeah, if the upshot is like you don't talk about homelessness, then that's not great, right? Anyway, and also, we do have Democrats right now who are in office who are like, oh, I'm handling homelessness. I'm taking all their tents away.
Yeah.
So that's questionable. Okay, next category, gender/orientation correctness. And here we get into my home turf. I use each of these words 7 to 20 times a day, obviously, in my life. What's so funny is because I know pregnant people is on this list, and my daughter literally said pregnant person yesterday. I was like, oh no, I woke her. She was like, I want to see a picture of a pregnant person, because she really loves medicine. She's 6 years old. She loves like bodies and thinking about like how the body works. And her friend just had a baby sister. So she's like, I want to know about pregnancy. I want to know about birth. And she literally was like, show me pictures of a pregnant person.
I don't understand. I don't understand that at all. Lindsay, can you help me? I don't
Being
understand.
mad about pregnant people.
How are you supposed to?
It's erasing women, Trent.
You're supposed to say pregnant woman. Oh, okay. I understand. Yeah. Well, that's outrageous.
Yeah, so this is something though that Republicans have taken on sort of like straight on. So Randy Weber is a Republican in Texas, and he actually introduced a resolution that said that we need to stop attacking the definition of mother, and this, comes out if we say things like menstruating people or pregnant people or people with a capacity for pregnancy instead of just saying mother.
Yeah. So it hits on kind of 2 points, right? Because it's got that sort of euphemistic or like people first language that people hate. And then it's also got this like anti-gender inclusivity kind of vibe of it, where it's like, I don't know. We, as mothers, mother to mother, let's really talk about this. But like personally, it never hurt my feelings for somebody to say pregnant person. I know what I am. And my doctors treated me correctly. And so like, I'm just not really concerned. Like, speaking of kitchen table issues, like griping about whether they said woman enough times is certainly not like one of my deepest concerns.
I just can't imagine people like the same people who are not supposed to understand any of this language. I cannot imagine them all of a sudden like stopping from their important lives, taking care of their families, working, children, right? To be like, I am absolutely flummoxed that they use person instead of woman.
Right? Well, I think it wouldn't register at all if it weren't already present in the right-wing language, where they're saying like actually saying birthing person is an evil thing to do. And so like it marks it as something to notice, right? Whereas if that hadn't happened and your like Surgeon General went on TV and said, we're working to ensure like lower mortality rates for pregnant people, I think you probably wouldn't even notice that it happened, right? You've just been primed with all of this other stuff about how evil it is to say that. So yeah, let's go through the list of gender/orientation correctness. It is, again, introduced so that you, the reader, will read this memo and understand these words as an attack on you and your ability to think. So it says, these say your views on traditional genders and gender roles are at best quaint. The idea being that like the Democrats are these out of touch elites. They live on the coast. They don't even live in your like state or whatever. And they are looking down on you, right? That's what that opening sentence says to me. So the words are birthing person / inseminated person, pregnant people, chest feeding, cisgender, dead naming, heteronormative, patriarchy, and LGBTQIA+, right? And this is a list of things that, like, again, I don't really believe that any congressperson who wasn't yelling about the trans invasion ever said chest feeding. And like, again, no lactation consultant ever advised me on chest feeding my babies. Like, it's because they looked at me and they saw the little F on my sheet and they understood that what I would be doing was breastfeeding them.
In what circumstance would you call somebody an inseminated person?
I'm not sure. I've never heard or used that word, but birthing person is one where there was a period of time where Republicans did get mad and they were calling it like the left's war on women, or it was like wrapped up in that. When you're saying birthing person, you're not saying mother. It's that same sort of thing. And Republicans said that Democrats were doing that. Democrats weren't doing a ton of that. There are some things on this list that Democrats did say or do say. The LGBTQIA+, LGBTQ, let's just like do that one. That's something that Democrats have said far more than Republicans in official communications. And I think they sort of like understand that that terminology wraps a lot of things. So it's easier to say it versus something else. No one ever says chest feeding. No one ever says cisgender. No one ever says heteronormative. Patriarchy's happened a number of times, like fewer than 10 times. Yeah, 4 times
Oh,
out of
wow.
209,000. And dead naming in e-newsletters, at least, only happened once. And dead naming was really interesting to me because I was shocked that it happened at all. But when I read the entry of what it was, it's from Representative Byron Donalds, who said the federal government needs to stop dead naming Taiwan, said Congressman Mike Collins. There's reasons why the United States, blah, blah, blah. And it was the argument that was like, we are not going to call this Chinese Taipei. We're going to call it Taiwan. So it's not dead naming in the sense that we normally think about it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
There's a lot.
That's really interesting, right? Because it feels like he's using dead naming almost as a jab at the concept of dead naming. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's the only time it ever happened.
I mean, this problem, the further we go into it, the real crux of this is that like Republicans have been saying that we've been all saying this stuff for so long, and so now there's like a memo that says we need to stop saying the stuff that we're not really saying that much, but to
But
the
like, where is
logic
it?
to the logic of this host, right? If we're not saying the things very much, but they'd like for us to stop saying the things so that people don't think we're saying the things, but we're not saying the things, then not saying the things that we're not saying won't stop people from thinking we're not.
Yeah. How do we fix the problem then? Like, yeah, that's very fair. So yeah, standing up to MAGA's cruel attacks on gay and transgender people requires creating empathy and building a broad coalition, not confusing or shaming people who could otherwise be allies. That's what they said. And I think that like you can look to somebody like Governor Walz or Pritzker as people who are actually really good at speaking on those topics without doing anything terribly alienating, right? Where they just say like, this is the situation. These are the rights that people by living or being in America have, and I'm going to stand up for those rights and like keeping it fairly approachable no matter who you are. And it's that plain spokenness that we love that I think Third Way also would appreciate. But instead they're like yelling at the rest of us for saying heteronormative too much. Like when, where, like, and yeah, patriarchy. And yeah, like I think putting LGBTQIA plus, it's a lot of letters, but it's also like you can simplify it. You can say LGBT plus. You can say, you know, there's like variations if you're feeling like overwhelmed by the letters. But it does refer to a real kind of group of people and rights that like need to be bolstered in a certain way. So it just feels like fairly normal. And yeah, inseminated person, I don't know, man. Like I know a lot of people who have had like IUI or IVF and they've never encountered the phrase inseminated person.
But again, we're not supposed to be looking at groups, which leads us to the question of, well, then how are we supposed to speak about peoples?
Honestly.
People, you know, I feel like we're like falling back into like Aristotle here. Like things are groups,
Well, yeah.
and like we use language to like denote this, to like have subjects to communicate about. I mean,
no, everyone's an individual and we have nothing in common, and that's important for us to remember as Democrats. Don't talk to people about their commonalities. Yuck, that's divisive. Okay, so the final, no, there's two more. They're just small categories. So the first one is called the shifting language of racial constructs. So then, yeah, this phrase shifting, it gives us this sense that like the terminology is changing so much that nobody can possibly keep up with it. It's this idea of like elite sort of like ideas over production, right? That they're like coming up with too many things at once and nobody can keep track. And so this one, it's introduced with these two sentences. These words signal that talking about race is even more of a minefield. You will be called out as racist if you do not use the latest and correct terminology. So right there, it's playing into the fears and the anger that I have heard in my more MAGA-friendly family, right? Which is that like you literally can't say anything about race anymore because you'll just get screamed at. And like, you know, it's really hard to like let people know that in their day-to-day life, if they speak freely and they generally like respect the rights and personhood of the people who live around them, like there's not going to be sort of like a green-haired monster hiding in the bushes waiting to scream at you for having said the wrong phrase. Like if you say a racial slur, people won't be thrilled. But if you say like the wrong exact term for the group of people that you're trying to advocate for, like it's not really going to happen, right? Social media is tough. Like I've been yelled at for stuff where I'm like, I thought I did a good job. What's happening here, right? But like, you do survive it. I'm alive. Hello, I'm here. Yeah, I mean, it's no fun to get yelled at, right? That's
No.
very fair. However, if you're a person who's doing like outward facing languaging to a public, like that is a risk that you do have to take. And if people are mad at your words, it's important to stop and think about, are they mad at me or are they mad at the words that I used? Do I stand by those words? If so, continue on. So the words here in the shifting language of racial constructs, you know, the minefield. Then this is like this is the cancel culture like myth too, which is that like every individual is at risk of being canceled for being insufficiently woke at all times. It's like, you know, there's a lot of problems with like internet behavior and mob stuff and like mob bullying and that sort of thing, like the main character thing that does happen. But that's not what this is. So the words are Latinx, or as I say it, Latinx, because that's what I learned it as, but it's not, I guess. BIPOC, allyship, intersectionality, and minoritized communities. Again, I'm recognizing some of these terms from my academic life. You know, like especially minoritized, like we love to take a verb and be like, it's happening to them, actually. It's not like, it's not them. It's like what's happening to them. Intersectionality, obviously, like you think I'm not going to encounter that in my feminist theory class? Of course I am. You know, Latinx is a funny one because a lot of people who it purports to describe don't love it. This is where my personal experience is very weird because I show up at the Spanish language linguistics department and the people who could be described as Latinx are using it for themselves. And they're like, this is who we are. This describes us in this context. But like a lot of people are like, absolutely not. Do not use that for me. So yeah, but also where are you seeing it being used in any particular frequency?
Yeah, so these are these sociology buzzwords. Allyship is not really used, and when it is used, it's sometimes used to describe like countries being allies with other countries. So that's not used. Minoritized communities has never been used. Intersectionality is about split, but it's not really used that much either. BIPOC is used more than by Democrats than Republicans, as is Latinx or Latinx. And I sort of share your own hesitancy with that one because in my own sort of work, when I grapple with like, how are we going to talk about a community, the sort of thing that my co-authors and I got down to was Latin. And when we talked to people, they were like, I didn't fight to be called a Latino for you to call me Latinx. And I was like, yeah, I get that. And so that's one where Democrats did use it more. Both of those are on the wane. And it's been not used in more than 40 e-newsletters ever. The sort of heyday for both of those were earlier. So Latinx was in 2020, BIPOC was in 2022. But I still do see BIPOC in some of my other spaces more around like PTA things. We're trying to like figure out affinity groups. But the sociology buzzwords are all not that used that much. And if they are, more by Democrats and on the wane.
Yeah. I like Latinx when I'm explicitly like dealing with gender because it has like it like makes you think about gender, right? But like the E ending is great because it is gender neutral and it is represented in a lot of like Spanish languages. So that is nice. Yeah, anyway, the point being, yeah, these words are not highly referenced. They have to do with like social justice stuff, right? And people like the third way have taken on this position that like social justice-y stuff is alienating and people don't like it and it makes them go yuck. And so we should stop doing it, right? However, if we're talking about a country like the one that we're living in right now, where like racial injustice is rife and being exacerbated by the people in charge of us right now, like, we might have to swallow that pill and talk about it. Sorry. And so they say, like, oh, yeah, well, we think that the words we are using are part of the reason the Democrats are losing support from non-white voter groups. Like, they figure this probably represents some kind of like, they read us as patronizing or something, and so that's why they're not voting for us. That's a big claim. Not sure if it's substantiated or not. I mean, the fact that those words simply don't appear a lot says something to me that,
Yeah, they
like,
don't
maybe
appear a
it's
lot,
not.
but I do think public opinion polling indicates that they are alienating to people who they might purport to represent, at least for Latinx. So I get the pushback on this one.
I think if we talk to our friend Evan from a previous episode, we might find that, like, it's alienating because it kind of reminds us that we're not getting what we need from them, you know? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, you're using the language, but, like, I'm not really getting the action behind it, right?
It's
Um,
that performativeness again,
mhm.
where too
Oh, I don't
worried
want to say
about.
performative because it's
But it
different for me.
is. It is to some degree, right? Because as
I
you
know.
just said, if we're not getting what we need, but we're all kneeling wearing dashikis,
Yeah.
then it
Oh my
just
God, that was
like
so embarrassing.
it was embarrassing, and I bring that up because that's the type of strongly worded
Mhm.
letter, doing all this nonsense where in fact people want action.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing where it's like, I very respectfully am removing, like, employment protections from BIPOC people. Like, all right, cool, thanks for saying it, but maybe can I have my job back, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's really fair. And I'm gonna just defend the concept of performativity as a linguist, because when you do something performatively, it means that it happens. So I would describe those things as non-performative.
Okay.
Soapbox moment over. I sound like I'm going to cry, but it's only because I'm sick. Okay, the final category, explaining away crime. So this is super third way also, because they introduce it by saying, this says the criminal is the victim is an afterthought. So we're really in, like, victims' rights, tough on crime territory here. And so the words are justice involved, carceration, incarcerated people, involuntary confinement. So what's the situation in the communications here?
Involuntary confinement never happens. Carceration never happens. Justice involved and incarcerated people both happen more from Democrats than Republicans, but again, on like incredibly small scales. Like the peak usage for justice involved was in early 2023, and it was 5 e-newsletters that said it overall. Incarcerated people had 8 in 2023. And I see this in my own sort of local work. We just legalized cannabis in New York City, and one of the hoops that someone can jump through in order to get a license faster is they could have been justice involved in the past. And I don't think they necessarily wrote this regulation to say forget about a victim. It tends to mean like you were involved in the justice system, whether or not we think that was an actual legitimate involvement. You've
Mhm.
seen some inside of it, and so that's how it's at least used in my local politics. In contrast, if you think about the word criminal is used 3 times as much by Republicans than Democrats, 9,000 to 3,000 uses. And so the scope of these things is just very different. And criminal has like ramped up over time, whereas justice involved and incarcerated persons had like a peak 2 years ago, and it was very small to begin with.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
the intimation, of course, is that when we say the word criminal, we think of somebody who's like a bad person. It has like a bad intimation about it, of course. And when
Yeah.
we say
Like, oh,
somebody who's been
dangerous. That's a dangerous
right,
person.
somebody who's been incarcerated or justice adjacent, uh, well, that is neutral language, and it doesn't surprise me that the Republicans, the conservatives, would be framing people as bad people who commit crimes, um,
I just think
because
Especially right now. Right?
justice
Oh,
involved
yeah.
generally isn't interpersonal violence. Justice involved
Yeah.
to me is mostly drug policy. At least
right.
that's how it's used in sort of municipal language.
Well, because to your point, right, in New York, also in Illinois, there is a push to sort of get individuals who have been touched by the justice system throughout the Prohibition era into the industry that we have now decided is actually not a crime
It's
that you can
legitimate.
go to jail for. And so, again, you wouldn't use criminal in that context because we're sort of admitting tacitly that, like, this wasn't really a crime worth criminalizing in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
right.
it's about like describing the situation as it is, right? You want to have a term that refers to these people who interfaced with the criminal justice system, not necessarily that like to like have some kind of opinion injected in, right? We call that like stance taking. Like calling somebody a criminal, that takes a firm stance on like what kind of person they are, right? And like calling somebody an ex-con or a convict or something, like, again, that's like a way to sort of paint them as a certain kind of person. um and so like you can see why, if you're talking about like the rights of people who are in prisons or have been in prisons, like you're not really interested in leaning into that side of their story of like, well, what did they do, how bad are they, you just want to talk about like these are people and they're experiencing something right now, and we need to make sure that like we're not violating their rights as we do so.
Mhm.
And then like, yeah, right now we have this huge ramp up in detaining people, keeping people in these facilities, keeping people locked up, in sort of expanding the definition of like what a criminal is, where it's just like any undocumented immigrant, or maybe even somebody who's like in the middle of their immigration process, and we're just like, no, criminal. So, that kind of terminology is actually kind of important to keep specific and correct about, I think. So yeah, that's a really interesting one, I think, because it just feels like, yeah, it's like woke, it's scolding us for being too woke when like we're really just trying to get something done here. Yeah, involuntary confinement was an interesting one because I don't recognize that as a term, but it must be somewhere a term that people have heard. Like I know like solitary confinement I'm
Mhm.
aware of. And yeah, I don't know why you would ever say involuntary confinement when you could say detention or incarceration, right? Like, yeah. And so that bears out because people are not using it. Um, let's conclude then. Let's make our general statements here. I love that their conclusion contains the phrase, before you draft your angry tweet thread, because of course everybody had something to say about this list. Like it was literally, it feels like it was written to make some people mad, right? Um, and so uh, it is something that you brought up, which is that like, because these words don't appear all that much, some of them do, but a lot of them really don't. It does feel more like a retread and a reinforcement of the attacks that Republicans are making against Democrats, as opposed to like a look at actual Democratic behavior, Democratic politician behavior, in order to create some workable advice, right? So, in as far as we can show that there are words that Democrats are using that are turning off voters, great, let's do that. But this list appears to have been constructed based on vibes. Like it just feels like it was made just by people who wanted to make a list of words that they don't like, right?
Well, I think it's
Um,
something that, like, my research is pointing to. Republicans control the narrative for conservatives, but
Mhm.
Republicans also control the narratives for what we think liberals are talking about. They sort of like have a stranglehold on both of these. And part of that is within the Republican Party writ large, they have more adherence to a centralizing repository of terms. It's like, we will say these things on repeat. And Democrats do not have an analog. The
yeah.
only word that Democrats have really coalesced around, at least in this last year, is the word billionaire. And that's meant to
Mhm.
like disparage billionaire Elon Musk or billionaire people who are going to get tax breaks under the one big beautiful bill. And even then, I don't know if that's that great of if someone asked me, Lindsay, what's the insult we should use? I don't know if billionaire would be the one to pick, because for a lot of people, it's still aspirational. And so they
Yes.
just like aren't as good at getting these communication terms, words, phrases as Republicans have been.
Well, you said it perfectly, right? Hammering, 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 hammering for decades. Yeah, the people hear it. The people hear it.
Yes.
It is ingrained in their minds. Um, Reagan famously said, what, the 10 most horrifying words in the English language are, I'm with the government and I'm here to help, right? Like, that is a mantra that people actually live by. And I
Okay,
know.
that's a really good point. And I'm curious about the word oligarchy, because there is this small group, right, of Democrats that have united under this like fight the oligarchy banner. Has that been taken up in communications?
I'm just typing it in right now. My guess is it's probably up right now.
Yeah.
It You know what it's split about? It's 161 Republicans, 127 Democrats, and it peaked in November 2021 to May 2022. That might have
Whoa.
been
So we're not in a
Russia.
peak
That might
right
have been
now.
Russia invasion stuff. I'm not sure what
Yeah,
was
yeah,
happening
sure.
then.
Yes, definitely.
That makes
The
sense.
oligarch. Because that's around the time when people in the United States started to be like, wait a minute. Are they just calling their billionaires oligarchs? Does that mean we could call our billionaires oligarchs too?
Yeah, that's what this was.
Yeah,
This was a lot of Republicans calling on Biden to sanction Putin, his inner circle, and other Russian elites and oligarchs. That's the phrasing that I'm reading right now.
interesting. Yeah, so that to me feels like it could be more effective, and it exists, and like if people would grab onto it, maybe it would work. I don't know, maybe it's one of those words that's like it's too high school level that like you know, so
I mean, I
we
even
need a
think
better
words
insult.
like fascist don't land a lot because we don't really teach World War II history. So like people don't know what this is, and so that's something that I think. And I wrote something about fascists and who's calling people fascists and who's calling people Nazis. Nazis, people understand. People aren't really saying it in congressional communications, but fascism they are saying on the left, and I just don't know if it's landing because there's like
Well,
not a good referent collectively for
Yeah.
many young people.
there's not a good reference, but also there is the problem that mid 20th century fascism could not be in America as blatantly as it was in Italy, in Japan, in Germany, right? It's a product of the culture that it develops from, and so as former Senator Huey Long said, we would have fascism in America, sure, but it will be Americanism, right? It will be this thing that doesn't feel like Nazi Germany
Mm.
because we don't live in Nazi Germany. We
We're
don't
different. We're big, we're spread out. Our aesthetics are different. We've
have.
already had it, so we have the references, right? So like, yeah, it would have to look a little bit different. Um, okay, so I think that's a really good sort of action item to finish on, is to say like what we need is some snappy words that will work, that don't shy away from reality, though, that aren't like, oh, buying into the framing of the right to say like, well, we do have a border crisis and immigration crisis, well, we are facing some kind of like demographic replacement, well, we are plagued by violent crime, and so we need to like lock more people up. That those things are not, they're like antithetical to the values of the people who tend to vote Democrat, right? And so it doesn't communicate very well. um, we shouldn't go too fancy. I want to be fancy, I like being fancy, but I get it. All right, so our homework to the listeners and to our guest and to ourselves is to maybe come up with a short word list of yes words, words that would work, words that we like. And we can hopefully see those things take off in the future. Do you have any like finishing thoughts that you want to give us before we go, Lindsay?
I think focusing on words matters. I think we really need to make sure that we are thinking about who's telling you what is being said and who's actually saying it, because most of the media picks up on what's repeated. And what I have found in the last 15 years is that Republicans are far better at repeating things than Democrats, whether it be woke, DEI, Green New Deal, or even things like IRS Army, job creator. They come up with terminology that
Remember
hits on
death
the right.
panels? That
Death
one worked
panels,
really well.
death tax. Yeah.
Right.
all sorts of stuff that comes from the right, and the left doesn't do it. So think about where these messages are coming from. And if you're ever like wondering, you can go to DCInbox and look yourself, because it's a free, openly available resource for anyone to go find out.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it in our description /show notes /wherever you find when I put the resources, that's where it'll be.
Yeah.
And then, keep reading Lindsey's Substack, because it is great. And she updates it pretty regularly with really interesting information. And I think it's nice to keep ourselves grounded in the data when we're talking about strategy. So thank you very, very much for that project. Everyone go out and get the book, How to Raise a Citizen. And we will see you next time. Thank you, Lindsey, for joining us. This has been Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer.
Thanks for having
Bye.
me. Bye.
All right. Good job, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.